Hello and welcome. I'm Dan Batista, Executive Director of the Institute for Citizen-Centered Service, better known as the ICCS. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're delighted to have you with us. We will be presenting the findings of our newly released Citizens First 2020 study. In a minute, I will pass you over to my colleague, Michal Jong, who's the ICCS Manager of Research and Analytics, who will introduce our presenter. Before I turn it over to Michal, please note that we are recording the webinar and it will be available on our YouTube channel, Citizen First, in the next few days. Also note that our Citizens First 2020 study is now available for purchase on our website on citizenfirst.ca. As a Teams live event webinar, you'll be able to submit your questions today by using the Q&A function. Most of you are certainly familiar with that by now. It's in the upper part of your menu in Teams. We encourage you to submit questions throughout the presentation. Following the presentation, we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible prior to the end of the webinar. We probably will go a few minutes over the top of the hour as we had a slight technical difficulty and are somewhat delayed. Now it's my pleasure to pass it over to my colleague, Michal, who will introduce our presenter. Michal.
Thank you, Dan, and hello, everyone. I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today and also everyone involved with this study over the past year or so. In the course of this project, we've successfully implemented new approaches to produce insights relating to the key metrics that we've been tracking over the past couple of decades, but also to shed light on new emerging issues and not the least to present a fairly comprehensive picture of client experience and expectations under the circumstances caused by the current pandemic. We hope that the results will assist public sector service providers across the board in moving the service improvement agenda forward. And I invite everyone interested in learning more to contact us directly. And so let me now hand it over to Marina Gilson, Director of Ipsos Public Affairs, to walk us through some of the highlights of the research. Marina, over to you.
Thank you, Michal, and Dan, and everyone actually who participated in working through the details of this report, most particularly the subscribing jurisdictions. Without the support, obviously, we wouldn't have the findings that we're going to be presenting today. And I think there's some very interesting and also very important aspects of delivering services to citizens that merit not only attention, but action on the part of those providing government services. In terms of the agenda, we're going to walk through, at least in broad strokes, all of the topics that are included in the national report. In addition to the national report, we also provide detailed findings for each of the subscribing jurisdictions that highlight differences between what they're doing, their performance and national performance, as well as some specifics around actions that should be taken to improve customer satisfaction. It's always important for everyone to have a general idea of the background and approach that was used when they're looking at the results of really any study. We've been conducting the Citizens First series of studies for over 22 years now and have maintained important tracking measures across that entire time frame. We look at a wide variety of topics, most particularly focused on satisfaction with services provided to citizens by governments. Which aspects of service delivery drive satisfaction and how that differs by delivery channel. We look at expectations in terms of service delivery, aspects which have the most impact on satisfaction. And in this particular wave, we were fortunate in this particular iteration, we were fortunate to be able to conduct the study in 4 waves across the COVID-19 situation. We were able to monitor expectations, satisfaction, and channel usage across that period. And we also are focused on ways to increase the uptake of the cost-effective online channel while continuing to meet the needs of all citizens. We don't believe that it would be possible for all citizens' needs to be serviced by the online channel. And while there are a lot of positive reasons to increase online channel usage, we also fully acknowledge that it won't meet the needs of all citizens in all circumstances. We also conduct a similar study, Business First. Also, I think there have been 8 iterations of that project focused on business representative satisfaction with and expectations of service from government. And it's likely that that'll be our next undertaking, is another round of Business First, to see how businesses have responded to the efforts that governments have made and how they respond to the service delivery under those trying circumstances. Our participating jurisdictions include the Northwest Territories, Yukon, British Columbia, City of Victoria, Region of Peel, the City of Toronto, Prince Edward Island, and the Government of Canada. In addition to individual surveys within each of these jurisdictions, we also include a national survey component. As mentioned, we have the national survey as well as the jurisdictional surveys. The national survey includes over 800 respondents in an online survey. The jurisdictional survey includes a sample of respondents, and we did a total of 4,622 interviews with Canadians using an online sample of internet panelists and telephone interviews in some regions where the population wasn't large enough to support a survey of online panelists. As mentioned, we conducted the interviewing across 4 waves. The first in June or July of 2020, when the pandemic situation was in full force. And as the situation evolved, additional waves were conducted in October, November, and finally wave 4 was conducted in January of 2021. When we look at the accuracy of any set of data, we think in terms of a credibility interval. We can provide more detail about that. Indeed, we have a footnote where you can find additional information, but it is around plus or minus 4% for data based on the national survey, and around plus or minus 1.6% for the jurisdictional survey as a group. The interval will be greater for data based on subpopulations. For instance, individual jurisdictional survey findings will have a larger margin of error. In terms of key findings, here we have boiled, I don't even know how many pieces of data down to one statement of what we see as the most important findings coming out of this body of work. The first is that online channels now dominate main channel usage. There's still significant potential to increase usage of this efficient channel at the same time as we have made tremendous gains over the past 6 months or so. We also see that customer experience levels were positive throughout the COVID-19 crisis. And going into this survey, we really didn't know what to expect. We knew that some services were being discontinued, and some services people were using alternate channels, and there were even new services that the government levels had to figure out how to implement, and people had to find ways to use. And overall, I think it's extremely positive finding that the customer experience levels were by and large maintained throughout that crisis. Overall, we also recommend that government should focus on increasing awareness, usage, and satisfaction with the online channel. The recommended actions include increasing awareness that services are available online. It's important to reduce the frequency of encountering problems because experiencing a problem or an issue has a profound impact on overall satisfaction with that particular situation. And finally, we need to provide means of resolving issues when they do occur, as well as improving the timeliness of website usage by making it easy to find information and easy to find the place to start service transactions. And finally, providing timely help has emerged as a key important driver of satisfaction across all channels, but particularly important for the online channel. Next, we're going to talk about service reputation. Before we launch into that, I would just like to say that service reputation is a very generalized score involving the perceptions that people hold of the various levels of government. By perceptions, I mean just what they're thinking and feeling, and this can be impacted by long-term attitudes towards government, things that happened a long time ago, can be impacted by word of mouth and experience their mother-in-law had when attempting to obtain a government service, as well as even bigger issues like the state of the economy and political impacts and so on. So a lot of extraneous matters can be kind of read into the service reputation scores. In the next section of the presentation, we'll talk about service experience, and there we have respondents focus on a specific recent experience, taking a lot of those extraneous factors out of the equation, so to speak. What we saw, and we're very happy to see, is that service reputation improved for all levels of government in the Citizens First 2020 measure. Significantly so for most levels of government, but in all cases, the reputations of services provided by municipal, regional, provincial, territorial, and federal governments all increased over the 2018 measure. Basically, the question here is very general. How would you rate the services you get from each level of government? And then we walk respondents through each of them. Now we're focusing in on the Citizens First 2020 measure and looking at the specific ratings that were attained for each of the governments. And I just want to quickly kind of highlight the 0 to 100 score and how that's derived. Basically, if a respondent gives us a rating of 1, very poor, for a certain level of government, they would get a 0 weighting. So if everyone gave of that level of government a rating of 1 on the 1 to 5 scale, your score would be 0. And it walks up through the ratings. So 2 would get a weight of 25, 3 would get a weight of 50, 4, 75%, and very good, 5 would get 100% weighting. So if everyone said a level of government was performing at a 5, very good level, then the score would be 100. Now, naturally, there are few occasions when the score is either 0 or 100, but what we're seeing here are scores in the low to upper 60s, which are all really very positive, but we do believe there's still a lot of room for improvement, and that different levels of government should be aiming for service reputation scores in the 70s going forward. We also specifically asked how good a job people felt different levels of government were doing in managing the COVID-19 situation. And we see that, again, that while ratings were quite positive in the first wave of the study, when people were, I think kind of a honeymoon phase, when people were really hopeful but worried about how their government, different levels of government, would respond to the various issues involved in the COVID-19 situation. We saw that decline as reality kind of sunk in through waves 2, 3, and 4, very consistently across all levels of government. And throughout this, we have found that while there are variations between levels of government, in general, the level of consistency is really pretty high, with ratings at 56 to 59% across the board on the measure pertaining to management of the COVID-19 situation. Just to provide a snapshot, this is actually from the Ipsos Essentials survey, where we can provide an international or global perspective on how Canada is doing in terms of government helping deal with recovery following the epidemic. Canada sits at a nice solid 58, hasn't changed much between March and June of this year, as compared to the global country average in the mid 40s. So we're looking pretty good. We're ranked number 3 amongst the countries that are included in this research, and this is telling us that our citizens feel really pretty positively about the job that governments in Canada are doing, looking after the COVID situation and the recovery following the epidemic. Now we're looking at trends in channel usage, and I think it's really interesting that website has really increased, particularly as time has gone on. At first, we look at wave 2, which was in October. And telephone was very dominant. Of course, governments had a bit of a struggle throughout this when suddenly usage of in-person or office transactions went down, and usage of both telephone, online, as well as actually email all increased. So there were capacity issues and longer than usual wait times when people were attempting to use telephone channel. And telephone channel then kind of declined a bit while website usage continued to increase. And here we're looking at the main channel used for a specific recent transaction. So we're really looking at main channel usage. We know that it's an omni-channel world and people often use more than one channel, but looking at it on this way, we see that website is large and growing, office significantly down to 22%, and email also increasing. When we look at online channels, here's where we really see the dominance that has occurred over this period of time. In 2018, online channels as a group, which includes websites, websites, social media, smartphones, apps, and so forth, went from 34% up to, across the 4 waves, 42% in Citizens First 2020 measure. We already saw it in the data we looked at, that people were using different channels than what they might have otherwise done had it not been for the COVID-19 situation. When we asked people specifically, which we did in the first 2 waves of the study, whether they'd conducted a transaction over the phone or online because of the situation, around a third said yes, actually I did. Again, the previous data already leads us to believe that it's split pretty evenly between phone and website, which got the lion's share of that channel switching. Email 7%, app or smartphone 6%. So that pretty much mirrors what one would expect based on the channel usage data. But how did people feel about it, and would they use it again? The quality ratings, the quality of a transaction that was conducted on a website, smartphone, or by email instead of an office visit, very positively perceived. 71% of people who had that experience during the early phases of the CF 2020 measure said, yes, it was good or very good. In terms of likelihood of using it again, an even larger percentage, 76%, 3/4 of people who used one of those online channels because of the COVID-19 situation say, yes, I would do that again, even if an office visit was available, advisable, etc. Awareness that service is available online. 39% said of people who did not use an online channel said, oh yes, I could have done that online. Which shows quite a bit of potential, because that 39%, if they're correct, simply made a choice not to use the online channel, but knew it was available. So it's a question of giving them a bit of motivation, encouraging them. It definitely represents a lot of potential. Significant increase over the 25% we measured in 2018. But the other group, the 60% who didn't know it was available online, and it might not have been, we don't know if they are correct or not, but that 60% also represents potential. If the service is online, and they can be made aware that it's available, it kind of pushes them into a bucket that's just a step closer to actually conducting the transaction online. When we look at channel usage and satisfaction, we've talked about channel usage. Online has increased, but at 65, the client satisfaction index, which we'll describe in a little more detail later, but the client satisfaction index is actually lower than it is for office visits. Typically, across jurisdictions and across multiple waves of the study, we do attain a higher level of customer satisfaction in those face-to-face visits. And it's currently at 70, telephone, lower at 61, online, medium at 65. And we suggest that one of the ways to increase uptake of the online channel is to improve customer satisfaction. We'll go into some detail a bit later about how we might do that. And as mentioned, here we have the client satisfaction index, which is composed of these three elements. I was satisfied, it was the best service anywhere, and it exceeded my expectations. One of the most positive things coming out of this survey is that we not only held steady on these measures, we improved a little bit, which I thought was pretty amazing. Given the circumstances and the challenges that government service providers were faced with over this difficult period. Overall experience at 65 increased by 2 points from 63 as measured in 2018. Typical again of the results we see using this model, 72% is the highest. I was satisfied, lower score for best service anywhere, and lower still for exceeded my expectations. And we felt that really pressing that lever, really exceeding people's expectations and increasing that score will have a significant impact on how people feel about the services they're receiving from governments. And again, here we're showing the specific ratings on the 1 to 5 scale, in this case from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and how that 0 to 100 score is calculated is exactly the same as in the previous example. We've got a jurisdictional average of 65 for the overall CSI, best in class higher at 69, and both higher than the jurisdictional average in 2018, when it was 63. And we find that a huge level of consistency across services in terms of the CSI ratings. In most cases, we've pulled, for this particular example, we've pulled out of 20 odd services that are typically included in the national report, a sampling of some of them. The only one where there was a significant difference was in provincial territorially provided transit, public transit, which actually increased significantly, statistically significantly, from 63 to 69. But I think it's really encouraging that across all the various types of services, some of which were high-touch services, some of which were low-touch services, various levels of government providing these services, we're seeing a huge level of consistency between the satisfaction levels that were measured in 2018 and those which we measured in the Citizens First 2020 study over the course of managing the COVID-19 pandemic. We look at 22 service attributes, and this is detailed in the national report. And I think there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Definitely worthwhile spending some time with that report. But just to sum things up, we cover a lot of elements of service delivery. Scores were up for 17 attributes and unchanged for 5 attributes. Using the same technique research approach that we used in 2018, we're seeing that we're getting at least as good a score as we got in 2018, despite the challenges. You know, we reiterate that the scores this year really have to be judged in the context of service provision with, you know, there were delivery restrictions, sometimes new channels and even new services. So we really laud this. It's a very positive achievement that government service providers have held these scores steady or attained small improvements on these attribute scores. We also look at the importance of these various attributes that we measure. Basically, here we are looking at the impact of the score being a key driver analysis. And on this chart, going the higher on the chart, the more impact the attribute has on the CSI. The lower, the less impact it has. Similarly, low on the left going up to high on the right in terms of performance. So the overall CSI score that each the overall performance score that each of these service attributes attained. We view as most important for the analysis those scores that fall into what we're here calling the improve quadrant of the chart, where importance or impact on the CSI is high, but performance relative to other attributes is low. We choose these as our focus because improving them will have more impact on the customer satisfaction levels than other attributes. So we're looking at timely help, future issues, timeliness, ease of access, telephone access, and issue resolution as being the most important areas for government service providers to affect improvement, to increase the satisfaction that service users have in obtaining that service. The upper right quadrant also important, high impact, but we're doing well. In those cases, we want to protect those. We don't want to see them falling down into a lower quadrant. For instance, if the performance scores were lower, they'd end up in the improved quadrant, and that's what we don't want to see. Looking at opportunities for improvement, again, issue resolution and future issues. Extra mile, timely help, timeliness, ease of access, and telephone access. So now we'll have a bit of a look at 2 of the priority drivers, problems and timeliness, just to offer some specificity around what service improvements might look like that will have the most impact on how customers feel about the services that they're getting. We asked respondents whether they had experienced a problem or an issue while getting a specific recent service. And we see that 16% in Citizens First 2020 said, yes, yeah, I had a problem, I had an issue. Which is up from what we measured in 2018 at 12%, but not drastically increased. It's really, what I think is drastic is looking at the client service index on the right. Amongst those who experienced a problem, the 0 to 100 score for the CSI was 43 points. almost half of the 79 points that were reported by people who did not experience a problem. So in other words, experiencing a problem has a huge impact on whether or not people walk away from a service experience feeling satisfied. Time spent, also a huge driver of the CSI, or Customer Satisfaction Index. If we look at telephone, if the telephone transaction, and we're talking here, we're specific with respondents, we're talking about the time between when they started and when they received information or what were able to start the transaction they were trying to achieve. If that period of time is 10 minutes or less, the CSI is 70, which is good, above average. As we move into 11 to 20 minutes, it declines to 63, and over 20 minutes, we're down 20 points on the CSI to only 50. Similarly, with website, we were asking people to consider the time that they went from when they started to when they found the information they were looking for or found the place to start the service. So it's that seeking, looking, searching phase that we're focused on in this particular data. And here we see 10 minutes or less, great, 68 CSI. 11 to 20, we drop to 59. And the curve isn't quite as steep for website as it is for telephone. Over 20 minutes is at 54. Really important to understand how much impact, just the length of time that it takes the person to get to where they're trying to go, how important that is and how much impact it has on how they feel about how that transaction went. Here we compare those average times across the board, and these are recalled times. This is how long people remembered that they had spent trying to get information or start a transaction. So in 2020, we see on the telephone, it was 23 minutes, significantly up from 2018 when it was 17 minutes, which isn't a terribly big surprise considering that there was strong demand for the telephone channel when in-person channels weren't available due to the COVID situation. Time spent looking online also increased, though, from 14 to 17 minutes. But what's really dramatic is the difference between the times that people recalled spending actually on those transactions versus the time that Canadians think is a reasonable amount of time to conduct that transaction. So Canadians say, well, it should take about 8 minutes to do that type of transaction, get to a place where I get the information or I can start the transaction. On the telephone, we think it should be 8 minutes. We're recalling experiencing 23 minutes. The gap is a bit smaller for online, but it's still very important. Canadians think that 6 minutes is a reasonable amount of time to get to that place where they have the information, to get to that place where they can start their service transaction. They're saying 6 minutes is a reasonable amount of time, but what people recall is that it took them 17 minutes, over twice as long. Turning now to digital identity, trust, and artificial intelligence. I'll go through this because of time limitations, but I just remind you that there's a lot more detail in the national report. We do find overall that digital identity should be a priority for governments. 3/4 of them rate it as a 4 or 5 in terms of agreeing that it should be a priority. So we have some neutral people and some don't know people. Really only 6% disagree. We looked at different ways that digital identity could be established, and it's interesting to see that the most positively assessed one, where they were rated their level of interest at 4 or 5, would be getting an ID and password that you could set up with governments to use for all different levels of government for all services at 68%. A little bit less interest in an ID specific to the same level of government. Only just over 1/2 using a secure ID you set up with a private company, such as a bank. Although that has been used fairly successfully by some government agencies, there's more interest in one that the government, an ID that you set up with the government. Less so looking at IDs that are specific to one government agency, and the least interest in an ID that could be used with governments and private sector that's issued by government. We look at trust in government versus other organizations with a particular focus on keeping personal information safe and secure. And it's interesting, government sits in there at 58% of people agreeing that they are confident their personal information will be protected when they access government services online. 57% trust in government agencies to keep my personal information safe and secure. Right in the middle there, certainly we see higher levels of agreement and trust in healthcare providers and in financial institutions, but much lower levels, dropping right down to 37%, who say that they agree that they trust online retailers like Amazon to keep their personal information safe and secure. The level of interest in artificial intelligence options when interacting with the government is quite low. We want to say as well, though, we also looked at actual usage of artificial intelligence at present, asked people whether they used chat bots and virtual assistants like Siri and so forth. And we found that in actual fact, at this point in time among Canadians, those usage levels were quite low. So it isn't terribly surprising that people, the majority, aren't quite ready at this point in time. But there is still some interest. 31% is a fairly substantial proportion of the population who would like to have a chatbot that would enable them to make appointments for telephone or in-person meetings. 27% who'd like to have a chatbot to complete an application for service. 23% using a virtual voice assistant to make appointments, and 20% using a virtual voice assistant to complete an application for service. So there's some interest at the present time, and we recommend continuation of monitoring this particular aspect because we do believe that it will grow going forward. Okay, so that concludes the formal presentation, and I think at this point we'll move into questions.
Thank you so much, Marina. That was wonderful. And again, very timely. Thank you for getting through a lot of material. And the great news is we do have quite a bit of time for questions. So again, we encourage those who are in attendance to submit their questions. We'll do our best to get through them. I'll kick things off because we do have some in the Q&A queue. The first one actually relates, Marina, I'm going to throw this one at you. Might be a bit of a tough one here, but I guess the question was with regard to problem resolution for online and web support, and specifically whether or not live agent or AI-based chat features have been widely deployed or are still pretty much in their infancy, particularly in lower levels of government. I know that's a bit of a tough question because we didn't really get at that per se, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that question.
Well, yes, I do have some thoughts. I can't really speak to penetration of usage. I'm more coming at this topic from the perspective of the respondents and what we're seeing and doing the detailed analysis of what the levers are. One of the levers that we really need to hit, especially in online, is coming up with ways to intervene when respondents have questions or problems. So whether it is AI or something else, we see that as a really critical component for improving the service experience for people using the online mode. You know, the person starts a transaction, they get partly through, there's a bit of a hiccup, they're not quite sure what to do, they're not sure how to answer a question, etc., etc. Well, that is the point at which we need to be able to respond to those issues, resolve those issues, so that that person can walk away feeling like, oh, that went pretty well, as opposed to fraza, that didn't go well. So I think there are a wide slate of ways that we can provide those interventions. Telephone, artificial intelligence, and so on, email. But the more timely that we can be, providing timely help was another one of the key aspects. Even better than providing timely help, I think, is avoiding the issue altogether. And I think that, you know, using some of the already available internal information, we can really look and see where those hiccups are occurring for clients that are accessing services and try to smooth it out. Can we provide just an information button that says, this means blah, 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 so people, oh, that's how I need to answer that question, and so on and so forth. But I think it's a very individual process of first getting that information into a usable format so that you can see where people are struggling with a service transaction online or over the telephone. See where those struggles are occurring and find ways to overcome those struggles, and in general provide some form of help. People can email, people can pick up the phone and ask a question, and so on, to augment and prevent, reduce, and then fix issues when people are having issues or problems in the course of a transaction.
Great, thank you for that, Marina. There's actually, I guess, a related question that I'm going to skip to and then get back to some of the others. But this one is, well, with regard to the rating levels or the scores when it comes to AI and chatbot. And the question specifically is there a demographic breakdown for the responses, I guess? So perhaps you can speak a bit to that aspect of the study, the demographics and the questions.
Yes, primarily, given the amount of data and information that we're dealing with here, we have not done a detailed analysis by demography. We have the data. Certainly we can do such an analysis, and I think we know the answer before we do it. Older people, 65 plus, are going to be less interested in AI than younger people, but exactly where that delineation is in terms of, is it the millennials, is it this group, that group, I don't have that answer, but certainly that is analysis that can be done.
Great, thank you, Marina. The next question actually is the flip side, going from AI and chatbots to basically to paper and mail service channels. And this individual wanted to know whether or not the questions asked about this channel specifically, pertain to why people still use these channels. So maybe some thoughts, and Michal, feel free to jump in as well. But the whole issue, because again, in this study, we see that typically in person, and that office interaction and mail still scores fairly high, despite the fact that, usage is declining. So maybe some thoughts on that.
Well, mail, I'm trying to think now, I think is a pretty low percent. It's definitely well under 10. We get more emails about service transactions as the main channel than we get mail. But we appreciate that there is a portion of the population who may be removed geographically, may have handicaps, may have barriers to going to an office or using a website. within that whole plethora of options for people, while we can encourage online and should for a number of reasons, at the same time we need to recognize that there are people who can't or won't use those channels, and since we serve everyone, we have to continue to offer mail options and in-person options, even if they are more expensive and less convenient perhaps for the government service providers. But in terms of channel satisfaction, what we really looked at was in-person, having that always, every measure across every jurisdiction, across at least a decade of research. In-person transactions always have the highest customer satisfaction levels, or typically do, let me say that. And that's really the focus of how can we improve the service experience in the online channel so that we get as high a rating as is achieved in face-to-face transactions. Some of that is very personal. I think having been through a long period of spending a lot of time at home with less and less personal interaction, the value of having a person smile at you and say your name and all of those things, you know, that can't be dismissed. And that will always be a factor in all of this. But at the same time, I think there are a lot of very clear indications that satisfaction with the online channel can and should be improved.
Great, thank you, Marina. Next question here, and again, I'm kind of hopping around a bit to try to link these up thematically. The question says, of the persons included in the surveys, what percentage portion, and again, this is, I think, something that we addressed in a recent presentation, Marina, related to individuals who have some disability that may provide challenges in accessing different modes of service. Were there specific results from that portion of the study? So again, perhaps you can speak to what the study can do and can't do with in terms of individuals with disabilities and service access.
Right. Yes, we included people with disabilities in this study. However, we did not include an oversample of such individuals. So we have less than 10% of the population who self-identify as having issues that would interfere with their ability to access government services. In actual fact, this is a GenPop study. We want to provide a really strong picture of how life is for the general population. I think it would be great, and I think it's important to also study some of these specific groups of concern, whether they're low income, geographically dispersed, have physical or mental or hearing disabilities, and see what their experience and needs are. But that would really be a separate undertaking from what we're doing with this series of studies. So yes, we included them. No, we don't have enough people to do very much detailed analysis.
Okay, thank you, Marina. Another question that I think is important in terms of the study itself and the data collection method. So it might be, you know, a good time to address this one as well. So the question asks, does the data collection method, i.e. online survey, impact the key findings, online being the main channel and satisfaction being high? In other words, is there a bias? So perhaps you can speak to the whole issue of the methodology and I guess the debate between sort of more traditional, or what used to be more traditional telephone surveys versus online surveys.
Right. Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, of course, you know, the media is the message, as we've been saying for decades. That being said, at the same time, we have now decades of experience doing online research and have conducted across the organization probably thousands, hundreds of thousands of studies where we've directly compared telephone and online research. And yes, if we went out and interviewed a population who did not have internet access, we would see very low internet usage. I mean, yes, of course, but that doesn't change the fact that, you know, we do also have a telephone component in this survey, and we don't find huge differences between those groups. At the same time, the general population, there's a very small part of the general population that is not available online. That's true. At the same time, we have conducted enough studies that we're confident that the online approach doesn't have the same academic rigor that you can talk about when you're looking at the accuracy levels and probabilistics and so forth. At the same time, we're confident that it works, that it's really quite correct, quite accurate. And we provide more detail in the report in terms of the differences between probabilistic sampling and online research. And online research in general is pretty well accepted across the board. Most organizations, including Statistics Canada, use and support the usage of online research. So I don't think we need to be terribly concerned that we bias the study because most of it is conducted online.
Okay. Thank you. I'm keeping an eye here on the time. We'll probably go a couple of minutes over the top of the hour. There are a number of questions. We'll try to get through them. Just going to pull one out here. Was there any information on hours of service desired through different channels? Again, I don't think we delved into that specifically, but any thoughts on that, Marina?
We didn't address hours of service specifically. I can also say, though, that when we look at all of this, we do ask one very big open-ended question, which is, how could your service experience be improved? I've reviewed literally thousands of comments that people made in response to that question and don't recall anyone mentioning hours of service. Particularly over the period of time when we were conducting the Citizens First 2020 measure, we really weren't terribly focused on the finer points of in-person service delivery because there were so many interruptions to in-person service delivery. But certainly for the subscribers of these studies, we provide a lot of detail. We provide the actual verbatim responses to those particular questions, and those subscribers are really encouraged to spend some time looking through that and seeing what's coming up that they're seeing with their own eye as a service provider that isn't necessarily something that jumps out at a researcher. So I don't think it was much of an issue. What was the second part of that question, Dan? I'm not sure I understood.
Yeah, I kind of might have to pull it up. I think it's been published, so I apologize. It's not showing up on my screen. So, okay, in the interest of time, Marina, actually, I do want to move on to another question that is more specific. Do we know how people feel about in-person drop-in versus making appointments? Again, I don't think that we necessarily, sorry, was that the one I just read? I'm misreading my screen here. No, okay, so that is the new one, sorry. Yeah, how do people feel about in-person drop-in versus making appointments? Again, that's, getting into sort of detailed questions, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Again, this wasn't something that really came up. We didn't have specific closed-ended questions about it. In the comments, there were a lot of people saying that, due to COVID, they were in extremely long lineups, and in some cases, they didn't feel that the COVID protocols were being fully implemented. There were a lot of comments about that, but issues around appointments don't stick in my mind as being a particularly highly charged subject.
Okay. Couple more here to sort of close things out, and I guess these are more open-ended. But and again, I'll pose this to you, Marina, and Michal. Perhaps you can chime in as well on this one. What, in your opinion, was the most striking or notable finding from this iteration of Citizen First?
Well, I'll start. What was really heartwarming, actually, to me, was how positive the scores were. We're doing as well or better under those incredibly difficult, trying circumstances, particularly thinking back to last summer and where we were and how much we didn't know about what we could do or how we should do it, and how well government responded to all of that. But at the same time, the citizens and the respondents to this survey really were willing to suck it up a bit. And you do see that also in those verbatim comments I was talking about, where people are saying, well, we had to wait 2 hours, but we got it done, and the government somehow kept this going, and we're grateful for that. And so I gave it a 5. And yeah, I was I don't know that surprised is maybe too strong of a word, but I was concerned that people would really be negative. Perhaps some would be hostile towards the services that were provided, but people really took that in stride, and they really said, boy, they were really doing their best. So yeah, that was heartwarming to me. Michal, did you have anything?
Yeah, and I think, obviously, the two, I guess, key findings that kind of I thought were important and striking for me was, first of all, yes, that we were able to kind of sustain, the service reputation scores, actually went up, and, the service experience scores were at a high level, even increased a little bit. So that was definitely, again, really, a piece of good news and so on, and something that we couldn't necessarily have predicted before the study. So that was definitely kind of the number one striking thing. And obviously, something that was perhaps a bit more expected was the shift in channel usage, and how all of that played out. But I would have to say that the high overall scores were probably the biggest kind of takeaway from me in that regard.
Right. I would concur with both of you in terms of your thoughts on this. And the last question, again, we're at the top of the hour, but I think it's a bit of another open-ended question, and really now becomes more forward-looking, which I think is intriguing in terms of the next go at this, right? And where things will be at that point. But question is, what's the likelihood of that governments will continue to score well on reputation in the months and years ahead, after the full fallout, I guess, from the pandemic and certainly the impact on the economy? So I think that's a tough one to answer, but again, welcome any thoughts on this, Marina and Michal.
Right. It remains to be seen. I think there is really quite a lot of reputational risk for governments as we go through these next stages. And it always depends a lot on how well we meet citizen expectations. Mm-hmm. Do people living in Canada think that, okay, now we're back to normal and everything's just going to be great? Or are they thinking, well, there's still some storms on the horizon. There's still some variants that could really throw us a few curveballs. And we spend a huge amount of money getting people and businesses through this crisis. And what impact is that going to have on the economy? So there is still a lot of reputational risk around all of those things, and whether governments are handling Canadian expectations wisely, and how well governments respond to those upcoming challenges will be very interesting to watch. And hey, we should be measuring that.
Absolutely. Michal, any thoughts on that before we close out?
No, I fully agree with Marina. I think absolutely there's some risk involved, but there are so many factors at play that, it's really hard to predict. Obviously, the reputation score, it's slower to change and so on. And the first reaction, even under pandemic, maybe for the scores not to drop, in fact, to increase. But, the coming months and years will tell us really what the long-term reaction is, and it will be really interesting to see how that works out in the future studies. So yes.
Excellent. Wonderful. All right, then. I would personally like to thank Marina and Michal again for their incredible work, leadership, and perseverance in completing another important Citizens First study. We certainly didn't plan for this to take place during a pandemic, but we did it, and I think the report and the work is, fascinating in terms of what we learned from this study, and certainly sets us up well for future work. I just want to remind everyone that again, if you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@iccs-isac.org. It's on our screen there. We'd be happy to follow up if you have any questions. And a reminder for those interested in actually purchasing the national report, it is now available on our website at citizenfirst.ca. So again, thank you all for attending today and joining us for our webinar. And thank you once again to Marina and Michal. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.
Yes, thank you all. Much appreciated. Your interest keeps us going. Absolutely. Thank you.
Wonderful.